Hello and welcome to the Speechie Side Hustle podcast. Today we are talking about going from overworked to aligned, redefining success as an SLP entrepreneur. Our learning outcomes today are to define burnout with an evidence-based framework and differentiate it from general stress or dissatisfaction in SLP practice, identify early cognitive, emotional, and physiological signs of burnout, and describe how nervous system regulation, cognitive load, and emotional labor can contribute to burnout, especially with high achieving and multi passionate SLPs, as many of us are. And how do I identify and at least be able to do 3 sustainable practice design strategies to support alignment, boundary setting, and long term professional well being? So, our agenda today will talk about understanding SLP burnout, the role of our nervous system regulation. Then we'll talk about the sustainable practice design for SLPs and then redefining success beyond productivity. So we are so happy to welcome Natasha Agha. Is that how you say it? You can correct me
Aga.
when you introduce yourself. And if you could please introduce yourself and let us know what you do and who you are.
Absolutely. Well, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me. Yes, I am Natasha Aga. I am a speech language pathologist. I am also a business consultant, private practice strategist, and self-leadership and alignment coach is kind of my area of expertise. And I also host my own podcast, The Fear Chronicles, which is false evidence appearing real. I founded my current business, which is Natasha Aga Consulting. And I support burned out private practice owners and clinicians with reclaiming their time, their energy, and alignment without sacrificing their time and their income. So, and I like to integrate everything from nervous system regulation, evidence-based practice, and obviously some business strategy that goes behind that. So,
Awesome. Well, we are so happy you're here today and
thank
talking
you.
about this specialty topic. So I'm Nicole Umania dos Santos. I am an SLPA and the COO and ASHA CEA of Tassel Learning and the co-host of the Speechie Side Hustle podcast. I've been an SLPA since 2017 with a bachelor's degree from Emerson College. I'm also the founder of Nicole Umana Creative, where I support small businesses with branding and design strategy. And a lot of them have been SLP based businesses, which I'm happy to say. And I'm also passionate about helping clinicians build aligned and sustainable careers through entrepreneurship and creative growth. So let's do our financial disclosures. Natasha, could you read yours?
Sure. Have ownership interests and my business is Natasha Aga Consulting LLC. I have digital education programs, including programs called All Starts With You, Back to Balance, and the Private Practice Burnout Solution, as well as being a podcast host to the Fear Chronicles.
Awesome. And as I mentioned, I'm the COO of Tassel and I do receive compensation for this role and also the owner of Nicole Umana Creative. So let's dive into what burnout really means for SLPs and how it can be misunderstood. So, Natasha, burnout is talked a lot in our field, but what do you see SLPs misunderstanding about burnout the most?
I love this question because I think we tend to be kind of concrete and when we think about it. And the biggest misunderstanding is we will feel as though it's a personal failure. And it's feeling like the idea of I need to have better time management or I just need to try harder. I need to do more. And really burnout isn't a motivational issue. It's really about chronic stress and chronic dysregulation and this misalignment, along with this cognitive and emotional overload that we tend to have. And that kind of culminates into how burnout manifests. And as far as, some research, a lot of the research that I found is particularly attributed to healthcare. And I think too, because that was predominantly been my setting across different settings in my 15 years. But there's studies that have shown that burnout is really driven by a system level. So there was a recent systematic review, and it looked at allied health professionals, nurses, doctors, and they found that like interventions of actually targeting workplace structure was indeed more effective than just teaching individuals how to just cope and teaching them
Oh,
coping strategies.
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd say if things can come more from a strategic level or hierarchy, that can probably help more than just. I think a lot of us feel that pressure of just like, I need to do better, I need to have better boundaries, or I need to do this. But if
Mm-hmm.
there is a system in place that can really help people long term and probably can help with some of the turnover that some businesses probably see too.
Yes, yes. So I feel like that's super important. Yeah.
Mm, yeah. So, what do you think are some early signs that most SLPs probably miss within themselves?
I I love all of the questions that we came up with because, we alluded to it even in the beginning, right? We tend to be high achievers, right? But we're also super empathetic. I think that is also why we get into these fields and have these careers. And we become really vulnerable and we essentially over-identify with helping. And in doing so, we end up normalizing self-sacrifice. So that kind of leads into what those early signs end up looking like. And they're really subtle, right? So it'll be like irritability, resentment, sometimes like emotional numbness, even, and starting to dread things that like tasks and activities that you used to enjoy, and feeling on edge even when you're not even at work, completely separate. And it starts to kind of show up everywhere.
Mm,
And it's not a failure, it's feedback. And I think that is like kind of what we end up missing, is feeling as though we start dreading and we're overextending our capacity, and then we don't give ourselves permission to respond to that feeling. Does that make sense?
yeah, definitely. And we mentioned high achieving SLPs, but I also feel like SLPs who are early in their careers probably are, I mean, they are high achieving, they've gotten to that point, but probably also so vulnerable to wanting to take on more, wanting to learn more, having so many options in our field too. You can sometimes feel bombarded by that and kind of miss those like internal boundaries and signs that like your body is telling you. So I
Absolutely.
yeah, I really love that. So I mean, for listeners, we can often think about like what's the first thing that you're noticing once something that you felt off. Natasha, did you have that kind of moment where you kind of were able to step back or able to identify that in yourself?
Absolutely. And it's again really like interesting. It's like I think sometimes we know a lot of these things intellectually, and I would catch myself throughout my career sometimes, depending on what the topic was, is like do as I say, not as I do, and I give really great advice and strategies, and then when it came to actually reflecting on things that were happening in myself, I didn't really identify until it got to the point where again, it was like those signs kind of bled everywhere, and it was things in my body that I
Mhm.
finally was like, oh my gosh, I don't like. I ignored the signs within my body. And it actually turned into when I had my private practice that I realized that I was doing all of the same things, these coping mechanisms, all these things that weren't working before, I was doing them all over again. And then I had to throw my hands up and I just like kind of had a panic attack. And that was the thing that just like kind of launched me into going, okay, something has to change.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of us can probably relate to that is we don't want to stop. And at some point or
Mm-hmm.
another, our body forces us to stop. And
Mm-hmm.
that's when things might click that it's like if something doesn't change, then we're gonna end up with like more problems in the future. So I hope that
Mm-hmm.
this podcast is able to like reach people in understanding that before they reach that level. Because I mean, the
Right.
sooner it's easier to recover from that than like long-term burnout too, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more. So let me go on over. And why doesn't just do less or that kind of idea actually fix burnout?
It seems like the simple solution, right? It's just like just do less. That's what it is. It's about this workload, but it actually has almost nothing to do with the workload itself because again, we kind of already touched on it within our bodies. So it's our nervous system, it's overloaded, it's overworking, it's overextended. We're doing too much, but then it's the cognitive load. So it's like again, we're in fight or flight and we're managing the P word, productivity, right? So we have the productivity pressure, the emotional labor that goes on top of it, and documentation and decision making. So when we have all these things, if we reduce that, it doesn't actually regulate our nervous system because it's much deeper than that at that point. So, and there's research too on this cognitive load theory. And again, intellectually, we understand like working memory, right? But when it comes to really reflecting on ourselves, working memory has limits. So when we are switching between multiple like ideas, tasks, what we're doing, and then emotionally regulating for others, we completely exhaust these limits. And so again, I refer to healthcare, but that emotional labor, we're holding space. So we're holding space for our clients. We're holding space for families. We're holding space for even administration or our colleagues. We're holding space for all these people. And then we're suppressing our own stress response when we do that. So it's again a misalignment and not a motivational thing. And I kind of liken this to, oh, you know what? I don't want to skip ahead. Never mind. There's so much that I want to say, and I want to stay on topic, but that's what ends up being. It's a misalignment, not a motivational issue, and that's what's really the burnout trigger. So until
Mm.
we feel safe inside, meaning our nervous system, the workload needs to align with our values and our capacity. So it's not just doing less. That is one piece of the puzzle. The others
Mhm.
have to align as well. So it's kind of looking at that bigger picture. So that's why doing less doesn't actually fix the problem. There's more to it than that.
Yeah, thank you for that. And can you dive a little bit deeper into like somebody who might be new to the terms of cognitive load or emotional labor, kind of more of what that means or how somebody can recognize what their cognitive load really is or their emotional labor is and how that like kind of carries outside of the workplace?
Sure. When it comes to that, I liken it to what like it's almost like compassion fatigue, right? So it's a level of we kind of I'm trying to be careful of the words I use for this, but it's kind of almost self-abandonment. It's just we focus so much on everyone else around us or everything else around us, and it becomes very external to the point where we essentially scatter our mental load is everywhere else. Again, not being able to feel and be present inward and understand how that external stimuli or everything that we're fixating outside of us is basically max us out completely in our capacity for to feel and to be able to think and process. So it then there's nothing left to reflect and see what's going on internally because we don't have the capacity for that because we are so focused on everything and everyone else around us. I think that was a roundabout way, but
Yeah, no, that was excellent. So essentially the idea of there's so many other aspects of our day or other people we're concerned about or whatever, just like taking up more space than we're aware of. And I'm sure like a lot of us, maybe if you're an empath or just you may have been in the same place or working with the same families for a really long time, you probably are taking that home with you more than you realize, correct?
yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So I like the kind of how you said before, it may not be an issue that maybe you can't handle something or just you can't you want to do more, but it's not really about just tailoring down those day-to-day tasks. It's like you said earlier, kind of more of a system that was designed to not be sustainable for our bodies and what we need.
Absolutely.
So many SLPs feel overworked. It's something that we've heard a lot, but they don't necessarily want to leave the field or the profession. We love what we do. We did this for a reason. We've gone through however much schooling and have worked in different areas of the field and different kinds of families, but how can clinicians kind of redesign their work without starting from scratch, burning everything down? What do you think?
Right? I like the dramatics there because I feel like that is really reflective of what we're talking about because there's like this almost this false binary where it's like this all or nothing, or it's I either have to stay super miserable or I just have to leave entirely. And there's so much in between, and it doesn't have to be one or the other. It's and then most of the time it's that you don't actually want to quit, right? Because it's we went into this field for whatever our why was. We want to help people. We want, we feel really, it's a rewarding career. It really is. And, but they want that less pressure. They want more autonomy, right? And they may not have the language for this, right? But they may want more alignment. And they just don't know how this happens. The how is really unclear, right? And so, it's not even about the quitting. It's redesigning what it is that you want. And it really is strategic. So you really, again, have to reflect, and that's when you have to really look inward at this point. And it's scheduling is a huge piece of that, right? And I think that we have to identify like what our energy level is and what feels sustainable to us to do. So not scheduling based on what we're available for, because we could be available for a lot, but that doesn't necessarily mean we should work that entire time or whatever that looks like. And then there's boundaries, which I think is huge. And I know for me personally, as my career progressed, my boundaries became blurred and more blurred and more blurred. And it just is, again, it was very subtle. It's something I didn't really notice over time. And then the biggie, I think it doesn't matter what setting or like where you are, but reducing the invisible labor. I think that is huge. So it's not something that's necessarily on your job description because there's other things that happen. There's texts, there's emails, there's all these things that happen, that don't necessarily coincide with your day, but can increase that cognitive load or emotional load, even in some cases, that tend to come up. And so, there's again in healthcare more burnout research that it consistently shows the autonomy and control that one person has over their work environment is the proactive factor to address burnout. Really, it's just, again, it goes back to the autonomy. You don't have to quit, you don't have to burn it all down. You just have to figure out what are sustainable systems that work for you. And then that protects not only, your clinical excellence, your expertise, but also your well-being, because this is not just one or the other. This is you are a whole person, right? You are, who you are at your setting or whatever it is that you do, and you want to be that same full, living that full life at home. And how do you make those two reflect one another in a way that feels really, really good to you?
Mm. Can you give maybe even some like examples of different ways you've helped other clinicians kind of either modify their schedule, recognize what boundaries have been blurred, or identify that like invisible labor?
Oh, yeah. Sometimes a really good way, because everybody's life and day to day is so different, is actually kind of tracking what's happening. So almost kind of doing like a little mini audit on yourself of like where time is actually going is huge, because sometimes we think we know what we're doing, and then we don't really see it until like we actually kind of keep track of like, oh no, I spent an extra 30 minutes, say, outside of work, and I was checking emails, or I was responding to texts, or I was doing this, or, I spent a whole lot of time. Sometimes it's scrolling, like the things that we do in avoidance, or if we're like, kind of again burned out and not knowing what to do with ourselves. It's really doing like a time audit. And then the other piece is really looking at what your ideal day would look like, or ideal week, and then comparing that to what's actually happening, and what then looking and being like, what changes would I need to make between what it is now and what that ideal, because that ideal week is not a dream. You can make that happen for yourself. It's just again about being strategic and looking at it and saying, how can I create this in my life? Because this is what I want and this is what I have. And making those pair up. So that is again that nice round life that you're looking for. So a lot of it is time management in a sense, but then also like, yeah, what are your clear work boundaries? What does that look like? And how can you put that together? And that needs to feel good, because then again, that's that alignment piece. That's the other piece of the puzzle that comes into it, right? It'll probably involve doing a little less work, but what does that look like? Or can you make that balance in a way that feels good? Because obviously there's necessary things to do like work, and you love what you do, but how can you make that feel even better? So when you come home, you feel like, oh, that was a really great day. Or I had that really great session. Or, I really felt like I made a difference today and I don't feel drained.
Yeah, that sounds good. And do you think that there are different things that people can look for in their day too, like even when they're doing that audit to kind of like help boost that joy that they feel? Like maybe they aren't recognizing, I don't know, like this client made this goal today, or I was able to do, I don't know, X, Y, or Z to kind of increase my joy.
I love it. And there's a few different ways that I like to do this. I even do it for myself. It's just like even just tracking daily wins, honestly. Like I have like a running document that I keep and I go to it every day and it's like reflecting on the day, but like, okay, what was a great thing that happened today? It doesn't matter if you think it was big or small, because that's all perception. That doesn't matter. Like, what was a great thing? Like, it could be even just for work. Like, I had that great session, or so and so did this today, and really tracking those wins. Because I think too, we lose sight of that, like the good that is happening and the good that we we provide, and and because we're all making a difference, and we just to help keep that perspective, and then it's another way to keep momentum, and it really just keeps you attached to your anchor and your why, because I think that too gets lost in kind of the minutia of all the day to day, and especially when you are overloaded cognitively and emotionally, and like what's actually happening, and it brings you back to that. So tracking your wins is huge. I would do it daily, and
I
obviously
loved
the big
that.
stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, I love that because I feel like there's uh like an actual term for it. I don't remember what it is right now, but basically like whatever our brain kind of sees or looks out for can be like reinforced over and over again. So if we're looking
Oh,
at
your
that,
reticular activating system. I talk
y-
about it constantly.
yeah,
Yes.
and
Huge.
thank you for pulling that out. I could
Hmm.
not get that
Yes.
out of my brain.
Yes. Yes. As soon as you said it,
But
I was like, yes.
yeah,
Use
so if
that
we're
to your
looking for
benefit.
negativity, yeah, exactly. Like that's
That's exactly what you'll see.
reinforced.
Mm-hmm.
But just like you said, like if we have a list of wins for the day, or we're trying to look for that positivity, like it's a muscle that we keep working on. And then once you start looking for those wins, you start looking for that positivity, like it's
Yes.
easier for your brain to just grasp onto that.
I love that you mentioned it. I honestly, I talk about it a lot in like all of the content because that I do, just because it is so simple to help your brain work for you. And that is a huge one. And again, it's the perspective, but then it's going to filter and it's going to show you more of that. So you're like, I had this great win today, and you're going to see more of that success. And that is just going to help build, again, that momentum. And it's going to keep you not even motivated, inspired, because motivation is kind of external. You want to feel that internally and be inspired. And you're like, yeah, you know what? I am making a difference. I am important and I do this amazing work. And it's going to propel you to continue to move forward. So I love that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for taking
Hmm.
that term out of the back of my brain. I was like, I couldn't
Yeah.
get there.
Yes. Well, you're
Um,
welcome.
so we also talked a little bit about like the workload. And one of the things you touched on that I want to bring back is making like realistic or being realistic about what we can do in a day. And I think, we've
Hmm.
talked about high achieving SLPs. We've like, all of us kind of, I think, know about ourselves and the demands of our job that we might, and you said kind of like blurred boundaries, we might start being unrealistic with what we can
Hmm.
do in a day. So how do you have any like tips for SLPs and those listening on how we can kind of become more realistic and like what we're doing with what realistically we can do in a day? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I think it's a nice combination of there's a little bit of strategy to it, and it really comes down to awareness. And what I mean by awareness is awareness of our energy. So when we wake up first thing in the morning to when we go to bed, we have kind of like this bell curve of what our energy looks like in a day. And you really being strategic of when it comes to like doing certain things that are like, say, similar. So this is a way to also save time. So if you feel like you have a lot to do, one way is to like kind of almost you create blocks, but you batch certain things closer together that like are similar. And I think that's something I was going to touch on later, but I'll talk about now is like because we switch a lot. And again, intellectually we know this is like do as I say, not as I do, but then we don't
Mhm.
do the things when it comes to our own life because we like have a flip and like we don't think it applies to us and we don't think that it's just like we don't go, oh yeah, I'm doing that. Is that just keeping things similar, you'll get more done in a shorter amount of time when you're not flipping from completely different things. So that's like a kind of a strategy, but then the awareness is like my energy is like for me personally, so I had to look and be like, okay, looking from like these like 2 hour blocks throughout the day. When am I feeling my best and my highest, my peak performance? And I do certain tasks that, like, say, deep, like, require more cognitive power, like more like focused attention. I move those things to those blocks. And I do, and then, and kind of look at that. And because they're, depending on your level of energy, is kind of where you should shift around. And because for a long time, I was not really going with like when I thought when I cognitively had more energy and more capacity. And I found that things were taking longer and I wasn't getting anything done. And it's really looking at, because everybody's a little bit different, but like I'm better in the morning. So I do a lot of things that need more brain power. I do those things in the morning. And then when it comes to like, say, documentation, checking emails, just moving things around, admin, that's stuff I can do later in the day because I don't need to really, I can do it, but I don't need full brain power to do it, right? And then when I do errands, even like go grocery shopping, things I do before I pick up my kids, I do those things later in the day because I don't need to really think about it. I made a list, right? So that I do those things later in the day. I don't do them unless I have to. I do them all later in the day because I shift based on my energy. So
Hmm.
I don't know if
No,
that's helpful, but
I love that. Yeah, like working with ourselves instead of against it, just like you said in the PowerPoint here. But I really love that idea of kind of just, I feel like a lot of the times we put expectations on ourselves that are kind of made up rules. I'm
mm-hmm.
personally not a morning person. I do so much better in the afternoon and the evening. So it's if I need to like sit down and really get focused, doing that at like 8 a.m. is not not my
That's
strong
not good.
suit.
Yeah. Not
Yeah.
conducive for you. Right, right.
Right. And so like instead of I've also like, personally just dealt with a lot of like, yeah, those expectations. Like so many people are
Mm-hmm.
early risers. That's like more of the thing to do or more of like the I don't know, productive thing to do or something. But when we kind of go against that, learn our own energy and work with
Mm-hmm.
it, we can probably do so much more in a day than trying to go along with somebody else's idea of productivity. So,
Exactly, or aligning to someone else's schedule. So even if for someone is, doing, their side hustle or they're scheduling and they're doing working at different times, yeah, if their energy is better to do their side hustle like in the morning than if you're working like on call or part-time, do that in the afternoon. Like you have the total control over what your life looks like and how you want to create that for yourself. And like you said, then you will create more you have more energy and you'll get more done in less time. So I think that's a big one, and everybody's energy levels are different like you said. So what works for me isn't going to necessarily work for you and vice versa.
Yeah, these were such good tips. And for any SLP listening, like what, just thinking about one thing that you could start maybe this month or this week, if that's like the win, tracking your wins, or like working with your energy, doing a time audit, just to try to feel like you can bring some more joy back into your day
Mm-hmm.
to day. So you work with a lot of multi-passionate SLPs and side hustlers. So why do you think having multiple interests often leads to exhaustion instead of fulfillment?
Again, love this question. It resonates with me deeply because if I am anything, I am a very, very multi-passionate entrepreneur. So I struggle with this a lot, and it's the fact that you're multi-passionate is amazing, and that's not actually the problem. It's fragmentation essentially is what it is. And so I think many of us are naturally, we're curious and we're growth oriented, right? And so having multiple interests kind of comes with the territory. And then again, it's like almost like these imaginary rules of the structure of like how things should go. And we think that we need to do all these things at the same time, or we're so passionate that we feel like we have to do all these things now. And again, nothing wrong with that, but we kind of touched on it before, but it's that switching between, and could be big projects, this could be, different ventures, different things you're doing professionally, but that's not only that decision fatigue, as I don't think a lot of people talk enough about really the weight of decision fatigue when we have to switch and decide takes so much energy and capacity. And there is research on like that cognitive psychology with that shows. And again, I knew this intellectually, but like when we switch between tasks, it takes so much more mental energy and it also takes time. It takes, I think it's like about 20 to 30 minutes. I want to say it's 22, but don't quote me on that. 22-ish minutes for your brain to refocus between one thing to another thing. Again, if it's completely different. And we kind of talked about putting things that are more similar together. So it's creating a container of that energy. And I talk about energy a lot because I think it's just because that's essentially what it is. When we are multi-passionate, our energy gets kind of scattered. And so we can do and start a lot of different things, but we either don't finish them or we don't do them well or to the effect that we intended. So everything feels really urgent, but then nothing is done well. And so, or done at all in some of my cases for myself. So it really requires, I like to talk about like seasons, like, and you can do different seasons of focus, like one season, and season can be anything. I've said it can be literal seasons if it's concrete for you, like you work on this thing in the spring, you work on this in the summer, or you can make it like 30 days or 60 days of like, I'm just going to focus on this one thing. And essentially, you want to do something and you want to do something really well. So it's about really creating that container and that focus. So when you focus your energy on one thing, not only are you going to like finish it, but you're going to do it really well. And all of your energy and focus is going into that one thing. So, and then it can provide you clarity and it gives you that permission that sometimes we don't feel like we can give ourselves to take that pause and say, is you're not quitting, you're just like, I'm going to put a pin in that, I'm going to circle back to it, and then you create that plan of when, knowing that that can sit and you can do something else. And that can be for projects, that can be for side hustles, that can be kind of for anything is really kind of creating like different containers for your different passions. And, then you don't feel like you're doing too much and feel overwhelmed. It's just now your energy has a focus, and so do you.
Yeah, I like the idea of that. We tend to put the urgency on ourselves more than anybody else. If we're thinking of starting like a side hustle or something, there's typically nobody
Hmm.
there going like, you need to have this done by this
Right.
date and these are your
Hmm.
deadlines.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
yeah, we do that internally is like creating those kind of rules. So being able to take a step back and it doesn't, depending on like where you're coming from in your mindset, like understanding that you're going to do this with all of your energy and do it right instead
Hmm.
of just trying to like kind of throw things against a wall, trying to decide, like trying to get that urgency done. So I really love that idea of doing things in seasons and not fragmenting your energy so much.
Yeah, and I will say because I can almost hear it in the back of my head for those that are like, okay, seasons is too long. Like to think of, you can even theme like your work days. You can dedicate certain days to certain things if that feels better. Like, right, so you're
Mm-hmm.
not like, I don't want to wait like a month to do. You don't have to. Like if you have like dedicated days, like say Monday is the whatever this one project is or one thing you want to focus on, then you know that Thursday is going to be the day you do whatever. Like you can just theme your days. And that kind of can be again like with like kind of grouping things that are similar together, but you can theme your work days and not feel like you have to take so much space and you will still get more done because you're blocking that time for that particular project or that venture.
Yeah, and I feel like it's just giving you just the structure that you might need where it gives you and your body space for rest and recovery, but also
Yes.
you're able to kind of, whatever the expression is, but make your blows count
Mm-hmm.
with your energy, and hopefully that makes you feel more aligned in what you're doing. And when you do that, it'll shine through on your side hustle even more, or even on your
Yes.
like 9 to 5 or whatever it is that you're doing in a day. So those are really great. Those are really great recommendations that I hope people can listen to and maybe think about how they can give themselves structure in a way that doesn't exhaust them, but can fill their own cup and then also have time for all of their interests.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you help SLPs redefine success when productivity and doing more has been the standard for so long?
Ooh, I feel like we've touched here and there, but what I love to talk about is again, when we in the very beginning we talked about kind of like that over functioning. So
Mhm.
we are doing more than we are expected to do. And I believe you even had said, because I felt this way when I first started out as an SLP, is it kind of starts in the beginning where we're really green, we hit the ground running, and we learn about, productivity, and we want to do more and exceed expectations, and that kind of creates a pattern. And what happens is then that over time is like our idea of success kind of breaks down and we can't again, it's not sustainable. And there's research on that burnout consistently shows up when we are overextending without that recovery. And you touched on rest and recovery because there's no balance to that. And that leads to the exhaustion, the overwhelm, and ultimately the disengagement. So again, it's not that binary, you have to quit or, you know, leave or you just have to be miserable. You're disengaged. And again, that's coming from a place of, not being able to anchor to your energy and your why, going back to those wins and all of those things that we've kind of talked about already. And so there's questions that, because this is really a lot about self-reflection too when it comes to burnout, because nobody can really answer these except you. So you kind of have to ask yourself things like, and this is what, I'll ask even some of my clients is like, does this support your life outside of your work? Your current schedule, like how are you being supported? Is that supportive? And then the other big S word, is it sustainable? So I know for me personally, for years, it took, a lot of things amping up for me to finally go, oh my gosh, this is not sustainable. Like I physically can't do this. I like emotionally and cognitively, I can no longer, like the schedule doesn't make sense. My energy's not there. I am disengaged, like, right. And I am just like, I lost myself is how I used to say, like, I just lost myself in all the things, right? And then another question is like, does this align with who I'm becoming? And I say that because for me, like 15, 16 years ago when I started, I'm not the same person I was 15 years ago. Clinician, person, like so many things have happened. So like we can't treat our, like for me, like my 15-year-old self 15 years ago, she's not the same person. So my schedule doesn't necessarily, like, that's not sustainable. I'm in a completely different season of life. I do completely different things. So it's knowing that to reassess and kind of reflect on like what feels good now. You're always changing. Your schedule's going to change. What feels good to you is going to change. So really being like reflective on that. And when it when it comes, it's not alignment's not loud. It's really quiet because it's for you. So that could just be again a simple. It could be working a few different less hours or creating those boundaries, clearer boundaries for yourself. And because you don't have to announce this to the world, right? It's for you. And then being more present. And that's another, I think, key piece that we sometimes we get so in our head because again we think about the productivity, we're thinking about all these other people and we're thinking about the next things we have to do and what's going on in our schedule that we are not present in what's happening in the moment. That's why tracking our wins is really great too, right? Coming back to what's happening right now, how do I feel in my body right now, what is my energy right now, and then one thing that I like to talk about, what am I thinking right now? Because sometimes the the golden nugget is in what you're thinking about when you're doing the thing that you're doing. Do
Mm.
you like, is this I don't like this, or I'm dreading this, or I don't want to do this again? Like, what are you thinking about in that present moment when you're doing the thing? And that is all what's going to bring up that alignment for you. What feels good and what
Yeah.
doesn't.
Yeah, so moving, we've talked a lot about kind of like what it felt in survival mode, and then
Mm.
to kind of have that recognition that you've moved into that aligned state, you would say like the first factor would be feeling present. Is there anything else that you can say is like a definite, like you mentioned, like what you're thinking about, but what are other things that people can kind of notice to say like, wow, like this is big. I've really like made that shift.
Ooh, it's your body. Your body is the first sign. So I would say, like, For me, it was I would hold so much, I would get headaches. I had a bunch of tension. I realized I was holding my breath a lot and I didn't even realize it. So it was again, it was my nervous system and my body and telling me before that I was just like, I was so I'm trying to think of another word other than tense, but I was so constricted. I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel like this like good and when moving into like feeling like you've done it or like you feel better, like I could tell you that I feel very present in my body. My body feels good, but also I have probably the same amount of work that I was always doing before, or even more, but I I feel like my day is fulfilling, not busy. And I don't feel exhausted. I feel great. No matter, like, I worked the same amount of hours, did the same amount of things, if not more, and I feel inspired. I feel great. I feel like really present, and I pat myself on the back and say, you know what? I feel really great, and I feel like I made a difference today, and I did this, and it's really like your heart and your brain are like, this is like the coherence. It's kind of hard for me to describe, but it's just like, you feel really good and you know you're exactly where you're supposed to be and you are making a difference and you feel it in your body's going to tell you and you're going to feel amazing.
Yeah, I love that. I like that idea of just like how we're feeling because we also can just pull away from, like you said, like productivity isn't your worth. Like
Mm-hmm.
you can be productive, you can meet
Mm-hmm.
those goals, you can even be working more than you used to, but that's no longer what's driving your inner worth. And you can have a little bit more of
Mm-hmm.
that separation to feel that your career is fulfilling, but also not like at your own expense and the self abandonment that you talked about too.
Yes, and I think the key, I mean, we kind of touched on it, and it's all about like, but it's that rest and recovery. It's just as important as the work itself. I just want to drive that home too. So I think too, like, I talked about like I'm working more, but I'm also resting more. I intentionally put those breaks in there where or in those work boundaries, right? So like I might be able to pack more in a shorter amount of time, right? But I get more done in less time. So that's how I'm working more, but it doesn't feel like work, right? Because I have my why, I have my anchor. I feel like, and the things just flow when you are feeling good and you are doing what you want, what you love to do. When you're in the more of that kind of that flow, everything just feels easier. So I think that's when you're going to know, but you also need to be intentional to rest, if not the same amount or more than you're working, because I think that is like the key is just making sure you feel balanced. Whatever amount of rest you need, everybody again is going to be different, but you need to do that too. That's just as important. And I think that's where that true alignment piece comes in is that rest, which I think we tend to not put in our calendars and do it because otherwise it won't happen. I have to put everything in my calendar and I will put like, okay, you're done now, or you're not working today, or, you know, this is it. Like, so I think that's key. And that's how you'll feel it in your body because you'll have both the rest and you'll be super productive, but in a different way because it's coming from a different place, if that makes sense.
Right. Well, this has been such a good conversation. We had two really wonderful resources that have kind of been weaved through this conversation. If Natasha, if you want to just tell us a little bit more about these two resources, if other people can find them as open access or not.
I believe I purposely went to find things that people could just access without needing to jump through hoops. So the what I referenced initially was the workplace interventions to improve the well-being. And that again is more directed towards healthcare providers, but that one was really key with like the systems, right? It talked about how systems actually were more effective in reducing burnout than actual teaching people how to cope. And then the one actually forgot to mention in one of our earlier conversations had to do with AI and EHR or electronic health record systems. And that one's actually a really good one too, because that one talks about, which I find so I'm old enough where when I was working, a lot of things were paper and eventually things had to go electronic, and that whole transition was not fun. But it talks about how something as simple as like the EHR system, like say they were getting a new one, and how that was systematic, like if it was well implemented, how that actually reduced burnout versus one that was less than well designed and implemented, and how that actually increased burnout and poor job satisfaction. And it's so something as simple, again, it's like those systems and things that are in place that can kind of be those factors. I mean, it is partly with yourself, but even just the smallest things like setting up those systems and those boundaries for yourself are, they can only help you. They can't hurt you if you're strategic about what it is that you're putting in place. So those were the two.
That makes sense. So thank you
Mhm.
for sharing those with us. Hopefully, people
Yeah.
can take a look. And where can people find you if they want to connect over this? You also said that you had some clients that you help work through burnout and stuff. So what are the places for that?
Sure. So there's my website, which is natashaaga.co, which also has my landing page for Fear Chronicles podcast, which because I talk a lot about like energy and things. So that my podcast is more for like, it's like the mind, because there's a mindset piece to it along with strategy and things when we talk about burnout. So burnout's kind of my jam, but at Instagram at Natasha Aga Consulting, which is also my YouTube, my Facebook, my LinkedIn, my essentially my everything. And then I'm actually in the process. I had listed a few programs, but I am actually in the process of combining everything into the private practice burnout solution, which is the bigger program that I offer, which is kind of the pieces with it's three phases, but it looks at, the mindset piece, then the time management, and then the actual like the operational system optimization and processes and procedures to buy back time, because that is usually the culprit to being a solopreneur wearing all the hats doing all the things is there's no time.
Right. When you have so much to do in a day and you
Mm-hmm.
are everything, your social media manager, your
Yep.
COO, your
Yep.
CEO, your
Yep.
CFO.
You're everyone.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciated this conversation. You
Me
shared so
too.
many helpful tips. Oh my goodness. I hope that whoever is listening can just really take this in and be able to at least walk away with 3 different strategies that they can do this week to just feel better in their body and move into that aligned state. So thank you for your expertise and for sharing that with us.
Yeah, you're welcome. So fun. Loved it.